In the winter of 208 AD, one of the largest fleets ever seen in China stood ready to conquer everything in its path. The northern warlord, Cao Cao, was just one victory away from becoming the undisputed master of the entire country. But on the cold waters of the Yangtze River, a desperate alliance of southern leaders was about to unleash an inferno that wouldn't just stop him in his tracks, it would change the course of Chinese history forever. This is the story of the Battle of Red Cliffs. Picture this, a wide river shrouded in winter mist, the air thick with the clang of armor and the nervous whispers of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. On one side, you have a military genius who has crushed every rival and is standing on the verge of absolute power. On the other, a small, outnumbered coalition with their backs against the wall, their only hope pinned on a wildly desperate gamble. This isn't just a battle, it's the pivot point for an entire empire. One man's dream of unification against two men's fight for survival. What came next wasn't just a clash of swords, but a masterclass in strategy, deception, and the terrifying power of nature itself, turned into a weapon of war. The year is 208 AD. For decades, China had been tearing itself apart. The once mighty Han dynasty, which had ruled for 400 years, was now just a shadow of its former self. Real power didn't belong to the emperor anymore, it belonged to ambitious warlords who had carved up the country into their own personal kingdoms. The government was paralyzed by corruption, and a massive peasant revolt called the Yellow Turban Rebellion had shattered what little imperial authority was left. Out of this chaos, one man rose above the rest, Cao Cao. He was a brilliant strategist, a ruthless politician, and a leader with undeniable charisma. Starting as a minor officer, he proved his genius on the battlefield again and again. His most shocking victory came in the year 200 at the Battle of Guandu. There, facing a much larger army, Cao Cao led a daring raid on his enemy's supplies, causing a total collapse and making him the master of the entire North China plain. With the north under his control, Cao Cao's ambition was singular: march south, crush the last remaining warlords, and reunite all of China under his rule. He was already the de facto ruler, using the puppet Han Emperor to make his campaigns look legitimate. To him, this southern campaign was the final step. Only two major obstacles stood in his way: a wandering commander named Liu Bei and a young leader named Sun Quan, who controlled the rich land south of the great Yangtze River. In the autumn of 208, Cao Cao made his move. He marched his massive army south. The governor of the province in his way died right as he approached, and the man's son, completely overwhelmed, surrendered without a fight. This was a huge strategic win for Cao Cao. He captured the heavily fortified port city of Jiangling, a major naval base that gave him a massive fleet of warships and a perfect launch pad for his invasion across the river. Cao Cao's confidence was sky-high. He sent a letter to the southern leader, Sun Quan, essentially boasting about his strength. He claimed to command an army of 800,000 men. Now, was it really 800,000? Almost certainly not. Modern historians think the real number was closer to 230,000. But it was still an absolutely colossal force, and the inflated number was meant to terrify his enemies into surrendering on the spot. The message was clear: submit or be crushed. Looking at the map, the outcome seemed obvious. The dragon of the north was poised to swallow the south whole. Faced with this terrifying invasion, the south descended into panic. The two remaining southern powers, Liu Bei and Sun Quan, were rivals themselves. Liu Bei had a great reputation but no land to his name. As a distant relative of the Han imperial family, he'd spent years as a wandering commander, known for his kindness and for attracting incredibly loyal followers, like the legendary warriors Guan Yu and Zhang Fei. Right before the invasion, he had finally recruited the man who would become China's most famous strategist, a brilliant recluse named Zhuge Liang. When Cao Cao took Jing province, Liu Bei was forced into a desperate retreat, barely escaping with his small army and a crowd of loyal civilians. Sun Quan, on the other hand, was the master of the southeast. He had inherited his territory from his older brother and had built a stable and prosperous state, protected by a powerful navy. But even his court was split. When Cao Cao's letter arrived, many of his top officials begged him to surrender. They looked at Cao Cao's supposed 800,000 men and saw no hope. Why fight a war they couldn't possibly win? It was this crisis that forced the two rivals together. Liu Bei sent his strategist, Zhuge Liang, to Sun Quan's court to try and forge an alliance. Zhuge Liang was a master of psychology. He met with Sun Quan and his advisors and began picking apart the weaknesses hidden beneath Cao Cao's overwhelming strength. With help from Sun Quan's chief commander, Zhou Yu, Zhuge Liang made his case. Zhou Yu, a proud and brilliant military leader, had no intention of surrendering. He passionately argued that Cao Cao was far from invincible. He pointed out the flaws in the northern army with cold logic. First, the northern soldiers were horsemen and infantry, they weren't used to the humid southern climate or fighting on water. They were tired, sick, and their morale was low. Second, many were recent recruits from defeated armies whose loyalty was questionable. And third, they were northerners who got horribly seasick. The young and decisive Sun Quan was convinced. In a moment that became legendary, he drew his sword, sliced off the corner of the table in front of him, and declared, "Anyone who still dares argue for surrender will share the fate of this desk." The alliance was sealed. Sun Quan placed his best general, Zhou Yu, in command of 30,000 elite naval troops. Combined with Liu Bei's forces, which numbered around 20,000, their joint army was approximately 50,000 strong, though the exact numbers are still debated by historians. They were still massively outnumbered, but they had advantages you can't count. They were on home turf. Their men were expert sailors. And their leaders were united by a desperate will to survive. They sailed their combined fleet up the Yangtze to a place called Red Cliffs, where they would make their stand. As the two armies faced off across the Yangtze, an early skirmish broke out. Cao Cao's forces, already sick and exhausted, couldn't make a dent against the disciplined southern marines. He had to pull his troops back to his main camp on the northern bank, while Zhou Yu's allied forces set up their position on the southern bank, at Red Cliffs. It was here that Cao Cao made a seemingly clever, but ultimately fatal, mistake. To solve the problem of seasickness plaguing his northern troops, he ordered his entire fleet to be chained together, stem to stern. Heavy iron links connected the warships, creating huge, stable platforms on the water. To his land-based army, it was a huge relief. The constant rocking stopped, and the fleet felt less like a collection of boats and more like a floating fortress. It seemed like he had turned a weakness into a strength. But on the southern bank, Zhou Yu and Zhuge Liang saw this and immediately spotted the catastrophic mistake Cao Cao had just made. His fleet was no longer a group of nimble warships, it was now a single, gigantic, immobile target. It couldn't maneuver, it couldn't scatter, and if one part caught fire, the whole thing would go up in flames. They had found Cao Cao's fatal flaw. A head-on attack was still suicide. They needed a plan that used cunning, not brute force. The idea that emerged was as simple as it was brilliant: fire. But how do you get fire ships close to a vigilant enemy? They'd be spotted and sunk in minutes. They needed a trick, a deception so perfect that Cao Cao would lower his guard and welcome the danger right into his camp. The man who came up with the plan was a veteran general named Huang Gai. He proposed a false surrender. He would send a letter to Cao Cao claiming he wanted to defect with his squadron. Since betrayals were common back then, they were betting that Cao Cao's arrogance would make him take the bait. It was a huge risk, but it was their only real shot. Preparations began in secret. A squadron of fast ships was packed with flammable materials, dry reeds, oil-soaked kindling, and fatty oils. From the outside, they looked like normal warships, but on the inside, they were floating bombs waiting for a spark. There was just one last piece of the puzzle, and it was completely out of their hands. For the fire attack to work, the wind had to be blowing from the southeast, to push the ships from their bank into Cao Cao's fleet. But it was winter, when the winds almost always blew from the north. A southeastern wind was incredibly rare. This is where the famous novel, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, tells the story of Zhuge Liang performing a magic ritual to borrow the east wind. While that's pure legend, the historical reality is that experienced southern commanders like Zhou Yu likely knew the local microclimates and suspected such a freak wind might occur. Their trap was set. All they could do was wait and pray for the wind to change. Then, one evening, it happened. The wind, which had been blowing relentlessly from the north, began to shift. A breeze started to pick up from the southeast, the very wind they had been praying for. The signal was given. Huang Gai's squadron set sail. From the northern bank, Cao Cao's men saw them coming, looking exactly like the defectors they were expecting. As the ships reached the middle of the river, carried by the strong wind, the sailors on board lit the fuses and then scrambled into small boats they were towing behind. The unmanned ships, now blazing pyres, hurtled towards Cao Cao's fleet. By the time the northern soldiers realized it was a trap, it was too late. The fire ships slammed into the chained fleet. Fanned by the wind, the flames leaped from ship to ship. Because they were all lashed together, there was nowhere to run. What happened next was hell on the Yangtze. The floating fortress became a death trap. Flames roared hundreds of feet into the air, turning the night sky a ghastly orange. The air filled with the deafening roar of fire, cracking timber, and the screams of thousands of men. Soldiers trapped on the burning ships were consumed by the flames, others jumped into the freezing river, only to be dragged down by their heavy armor. The river itself seemed to be on fire. The blaze quickly spread to Cao Cao's camps on the shore, adding to the chaos. As the northern army fell into complete disarray, Zhou Yu ordered the main allied force to attack. Their war drums thundered as they surged forward, ramming the few ships that weren't yet on fire and cutting down the panicked soldiers. Liu Bei's land forces also attacked, driving the assault home. Watching his grand ambition turn to ash, Cao Cao knew he was beaten. He ordered a full retreat. But the nightmare wasn't over. As his shattered army fled north through the marshy Huarong Road area, heavy rains turned the ground into a swamp, bogging them down. The Allied forces pursued them relentlessly, inflicting even more casualties. It was a complete and catastrophic rout. Cao Cao himself barely escaped with his life. The Battle of Red Cliffs was over. A force of around 50,000 had decisively shattered an army that vastly outnumbered them. It was a victory born of audacious strategy, meticulous planning, and the courage to exploit an enemy's own arrogance. The defeat at Red Cliffs was a devastating blow. Never again would Cao Cao assemble such a massive fleet or have such a clear shot at destroying his southern rivals. The battle essentially cemented the separation of China into a north and a south that would last for centuries. In the aftermath, the victors moved quickly. Liu Bei, the once landless wanderer, finally seized control of a large territory, which he would use as a base to establish his own kingdom. Sun Quan's control over the southeast was now secure, protected by the mighty Yangtze River. Red Cliffs didn't bring peace. Instead, it shattered any hope of a quick reunification and officially kicked off the era known as the Three Kingdoms. This tripartite division would define China for the next 60 years, from 220 to 280 AD. In 220, Cao Cao's son, Cao Pi, forced the last Han emperor to abdicate and established the Kingdom of Wei in the north. A year later, Liu Bei declared himself emperor of Shu Han in the southwest. And in 229, Sun Quan declared himself emperor of eastern Wu. The three-way split that Zhuge Liang had once predicted had become a reality. The next 60 years would be filled with constant war, intrigue, and heroism as these three states fought for control of China. Today, the Battle of Red Cliffs is one of the most famous events in Chinese history, a story told and retold for nearly 2,000 years. It's a timeless testament to the idea that even when facing impossible odds, victory can be won with strategy, courage, and just a little bit of luck. The Inferno on the Yangtze didn't just destroy a fleet, it burned down one man's dream of empire and, from the ashes, forged the legendary era of the Three Kingdoms. If you liked this story about one of history's greatest military upsets, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of epic conflicts and brilliant strategists. Let us know in the comments which historical battle you'd like us to break down next. Thanks for watching.